an innovation in computer hardware. They haven't given too much detail yet, but it might not look like much, but this is the future of, it's, okay, I mean, it's a screw, but it's, we have breaking news from Corsair. I've been informed that there has been inflation since 2012. This is news to me, and I'm sure everyone else. This follows up the C70. The C70, I remember very well. I don't know how many people in our audience were watching at that time, but it was kind of like a military-themed case, had that ammo crate look to it. So Corsair is finally following it up with a Warthog, which is what this is. We're gonna run through the specs on this today, but it's a pretty fun throwback. Internally, it's kind of like basically a frame 4000D for the tooling. Externally, new panels. They're going with two 200s for the front, one 120 for the rear, which we can see on some of the cases over here. So this is the empty stock configuration where they're running the two 200s up front. It is a throwback in some ways. A lot of stuff to talk about on this one, but Corsair also has the same power supply that we looked at last year, or at least the paneling, except now final and coming to market, where they're doing the see-through panels on the sides. There's an integrated hub, and then they are, of course, doing RGB LEDs, which was the greatest thing for Corsair's earnings ever invented. Over here, a couple things we'll hit quickly, but motherboard trays for the frame series cases. So these can go in the frame series cases, but also support, so now there's support for bench lab to be installed in the frame series cases. Which we actually use those for testing for, basically it's an interposer that sits between the power supply and all the other components of the system, so you can monitor actively, and now they have per pin sensing and stuff like that. This is an Elmore project we've covered in the past. And then also cooling. So liquid coolers, they are including a semi-metallic, as they call it, phase change thermal interface material pre-installed on the coolers. So this is not a full liquid metal, which we have tested liquid metal pads in the past. But we'll come back to that. And then the radiator itself is also pretty interesting, where this is a stacked, so as shot from the side, you'll see it's basically just, it looks like literally two radiators, which should help on thermal performance in some specific configurations used as exhaust. So lots to talk about at Corsair. Before that, this video is brought to you by ID Cooling and the frozen A720 cooler. The A720 air cooler performed well in our testing last year. The A720 is a relatively high-end, dual 140mm air cooler with 7 heat pipes. We found the use of larger fans can be beneficial to acoustic performance given the thermals, although you'll want to check your case for compatibility given the taller nature of the cooler and its fans. ID Cooling uses an all-black look for its A720 and includes mounting hardware for all modern sockets. Learn more at the link in the description below. So for the Warthog, with fans it's $200, without it is $170. The C70 I think was $130 or so when it launched. That was a 3x120 setup from what I remember. You know, you'd expect $120 in 2012 would, I guess 14 years later, become a lot more than that. But this case is actually relatively, you know, kind of close to where a lot of the cases are hitting for the show right now, if they're not at the super low end. So a couple things that are cool. There is a keychain tag on the rubber USB-C cover. You could bring it with you everywhere. The front, there are finger guards, which is really just to match kind of the military aesthetic, you know, but there is a rear I/O light button, which we have some shots of this, but that toggles the light at the back of the case. Kind of matching the original C70, there's this covered reset switch. So you pull that up. You know, originally the marketing on the old C70 was, oh, this stops you from accidentally hitting reset, but it was mostly just kind of a fun thing to do. The front panel is a very thick steel, uses the sort of 3D Y pattern mesh that we saw on the frame cases that we've already tested. So we already have 4000 and I think 5000D numbers from the frames in our benchmark charts. This will run through as well though. Top panel's really thick steel. I don't have the exact, I think it was 3mm roughly for the thickest part. Oh no, it's right here. This is the 3mm part, and then they're running 1.0 to 0.8 for the rest of the steel throughout the case for most of the structural elements. It's relatively thick steel, which Corsair, you know, I mean, you can't ship like a military themed case and have it be flimsy. Internally, this is all frame 4000D stuff. There's a couple small changes in the bottom, but there's nothing new here to discuss. Shorter power supply shroud up front. And otherwise, if you're familiar with the 4000D, then you're familiar with this case already for the actual like build process. But that is the Warthog. Pretty interesting. I mean, We'll test it because the 2200s, thermally, obviously, it's going to perform a lot differently. So we'll look at that in our benchmarks. Let's go over to the cooler really quick. There's another case over here, too. So for the cooler, this is the Titan series. The Titan 2 Ultra is the only one I really talked with Corsair about, where the interesting part is the just stacked rads. And basically, they're running cool air through the coldest water. So coldest water is at the front, the warmed water is at the back, or liquid, I should say. And they're saying that in an exhaust configuration, you should get a slight thermal benefit. If you wanted to use this as intake at the front of your case, Corsair's pretty open with us, at least saying don't expect to see any benefit from that. So this is something I would want to test, but we'd have to do it in a case, I think, to really do it properly, which is kind of challenging. The phase change material that's pre-applied, so this does not turn into a full liquid metal, but it does kind of liquefy, so it gets that phase change as it's heated up. They were telling me it doesn't leave a residue as long as you let it cool down before removal. That was a question I had. This is a single-use application. It is pre-installed and should improve the thermal performance. This is only pre-installed on the Ultra. And then they also have a VRM fan in the pump block. So that, I don't know if we'll test it or not, just because it would require some extra setup. But technically, there's extra liquid in there from the dual rads, but probably not a whole lot. 2800X is also new. So this is micro-ATX. Corsair is telling us the same thing as a bunch of other companies have this show, which is they're seeing a higher volume or a higher interest, I should say, in micro-ATX cases. Corsair doesn't have a whole lot there right now, but some of the SIs, apparently, system integrators are more seeing more volume move for micro-ATX. The only really interesting features I will point out for today is there is a Mylar cover behind the power supply shroud. So that's optional, but you'll see right now it's actually covered, so there's no intake through there. It's just blocked. I guess they're doing that for looks reasons, but also at least the options there so it can breathe if you wanted to pull air in through from the side panel. It includes 3 120s on the side and the reverse blade, so it looks better, obviously. And then there's the cheese grater motherboard tray so that you can do back connect or standard motherboard installation. So I think that covers most of it. I'll just quickly show a couple things that jumped out at me, but we haven't really followed the frame individual launches too much, but some of this stuff is already shipping in some capacity. These are the wood panels. This is the first time I've seen it in person for the frame, where it is a thicker piece of wood and then kind of differentiating from, Fractal set the pace for the front panels and then everyone followed them, but they're doing this ripple pattern. Interestingly, Corsair said they're cutting this from a single sheet, basically the same piece of wood, and then numbering it in order, tracking kind of the orientation of the wood to try and retain the wood grain as it was originally in the piece of wood. One of the other problems with manufacturing with wood is if you mix and match, then you start to have warping problems. So it does help to use the same piece of wood, so it all comes from the same plank, basically. So anyway, they're doing that. Got some wood panels. They're saying that there's a slight thermal impact performance, swapping out the front with those. Didn't sound like a lot, but we haven't tested it. I don't know that we will. So one other thing Corsair was showing on the power supply side, the mouse works, nice. That was questionable for a second. So they have per pin sensing, which we're seeing this everywhere right now. I was asking them, like, hey, do you have any failure numbers for 12 volt high power? And they don't. Everybody with a solution hasn't really been able to give us a good answer to the sort of failure distribution of it. It is a spectacular failure when it does fail. Roman obviously has some decent numbers, but he doesn't make power supplies, so he's kind of limited on his insight also. But anyway, everyone's got a solution for 12 volt high power, which mostly comes down to per pin sensing. This kind of popped off a lot with the wire view and with the Asus solution. Cooler Master has something now. Corsair's got this in software. So basically, current per pin here, the spec is 9 point something. It might be like 9.2 amps if I remember per pin. But they have alerts that start going off at 9.5 or trips. So it's just supposed to protect the cable, basically, if the current goes too high on an individual pin, which tends to be where you see a failure. A lot of times, too, so for these cables, if you slightly cant it, like when cable managing or something, that'll be where you see a big jump in the amperage on a given side where there's higher resistance. But then also the 12 volt high power standard does, I believe the technical word is suck, because if you look at the spec and read the documents, it's a gigantic mess. So we have a whole 55-minute long video on that. Somehow we have spent about 10, 15 minutes of Corsair's product manager's time. I'm sure he has nothing better to do, talking about a screw. This is basically, they're going to start including this with some cases in addition to the 6/32 screws for motherboard trays and for PCIe slots. It is not lost on me that at Computex in 2026, where I mean, a lot of the companies are grasping at straws. It's not lost on me that we're talking about a screw, but basically there's a captive option, non-captive, and it is steel, so it's magnetic. I've learned something today, which is apparently this ring around the Phillips head there, the ring around the actual screw, is runoff protection, but supposed to stop the screwdriver from running off the screw as you install it and going into the motherboard. As you all know, this is a very common and real problem. For example, several years ago, there was an incident with a motherboard and a drill bit. That's all I will say. And otherwise, they're going to start including these in some of the cases. So I think this Corsair might actually get the award for the smallest product we have seen launched at Computex ever. Is it focused on that? You're gonna struggle to focus on that one. All right, so there it is. I've been told that the name for this, top secret. They can't announce it at the show because then Fantex and Lee and Height will copy it. So we'll have to find out when it's ready. I think that covers pretty much everything we wanted to go over for Corsair. So it's good. There's stuff for us to actually benchmark. So we'll be looking at the cases. The Warthog is the most interesting to me, if only because it's a fun throwback. The C70, if you weren't part of the PC building scene at that time, you should look up some builds with it because there were awesome case mods people did, really fun era, and relatively affordable. It was mid-range for the time, but at least it's not a $300 case. I think if they went larger, they'd have to do that. So anyway, that'll be it for Corsair. Check back for more. We have a ton of coverage at the show. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more, and we'll see you all next time.